Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Back on the Ballot. My name is Dr. Paul Porter. I have the privilege of serving not only as the NSDA's Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, but today I have the privilege of serving as your host. And I don't know which is a bigger privilege, being able to serve as your host or being able to talk to today's guest, who has been absolutely fantastic, not just in preparation for this webinar, but in the love and care and attention that they have put into the speech and debate community. And so I am thrilled to welcome the founder of the Brooklyn Debate League, recipient of several teaching prizes, including Teach for America Alumni Award, the Award for Excellence, and the Jewish Education Project's Robert Sherman Young Pioneers Award. This individual is a first diamond coach, recently awarded the Brother Sterner Lifetime Service Award a couple of years ago in 2022. You may know them as Dico or KN DeCalandria. Did I get that right? Did I get
You
the
sure
last
did,
name right?
Paul. Good job.
I have been practicing. All right, Dico. First and foremost, I want to thank you for doing this. You and I had a chance to talk for a bit yesterday, and it really got me even more excited, not only for this conversation, but for the messages that that you're going to provide for our listeners today. I was especially touched by some of the themes that resonated, things like reconciliation, our desperate need to call people in rather than calling people out, the need for civility in this activity, speech and debate as an outlet to combat silence, and really our need for access and the need for more schools to see the wealth of opportunity in having speech and debate. So we're gonna have some fun. This is going to be a really good conversation, and I am thrilled to be the host. I'm thrilled to have you here.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Paul.
Why don't we jump into some questions? Dico, we'll start off with some of the background stuff. 99 to 03, you competed for, say the name for me again, because I can't pronounce it. Stuyvesant High School. My apologies to Stuyvesant, the school administration, and the team. I really did practice the name. I didn't want to mess it up. So that's my failure, not yours. 4 years on the Stuyvesant speech and debate team, state finalist in extemp, national finalist in Congress. I guess we could say you had a bit of a decent career. Not too shabby. Not too shabby.
My brother's the one that actually won NSDAs. So in the family, I was not the talented one, but I had an okay career. That's true. Yeah.
Then really we should be interviewing your parents to talk about just how beautifully speech and debate is woven into the DNA of your family, because that's your stats are incredibly impressive, and to know that your brother's doing some good stuff also, that says a lot about your family. Why don't we talk about the influence a bit? You have a heck of a track record that is obviously translated into the work that you do with the Brooklyn Debate League. Can you talk a little bit about how your experiences in the activity influenced your path in life?
Yeah, happily. So I should start by saying that you talked about this being in my DNA. My brother and I both went to Stuyvesant High School, and my dad, who was a construction worker when we were kids, was on the construction team that built the building that would become our high school a decade later. So
wow.
I come from a blue collar family. I was the first in my family to go to a 4-year college. All 4 of my grandparents were immigrants, and everybody came here looking for a better life. And I was privileged to go to Stuyvesant, which is a specialized school in New York City. But the place where I got my education was not just at the high school. It was specifically in room 627. It was with Miss Julie Scheinman. It was with all of my teammates. It was those Saturday mornings. It was on that Stuyvesant speech and debate team. And my brother and my friends, everybody that's walked through that building and was on that team would say the same thing. And for me specifically, the way that it impacted me and really changed the course of my life came in the second half of my high school experience. The first 2 years were fun, and I was learning how to, get over the chip that was on my shoulder about being one of the kids on my team that whose parents weren't doctors or lawyers, right? Like being someone that was from a working class family and feeling like I needed to catch up. And being an extemper didn't make that easy because everyone was talking about the news around, at home, and we didn't talk about the news in my family. Like, and so I was already feeling a little behind. And the first 2 years was like, okay, I belong here. I have friends here. This is gonna be okay. But the second half of high school started with me um, in a pretty dramatic way. That on the fifth day of my junior year, uh, my friends and I watched the Twin Towers fall from a couple blocks away. So Stuyvesant's located in downtown Manhattan. We watched the buildings burn. We watched the buildings fall. I remember my best friend on the team stood at the window and said, like, look, there were people jumping. Like, that's how I started my junior year of high school. And speech and debate took on a very different meaning at that point. It was not about trophies. It was not about breaking. It was not about showing off. It wasn't any of that. It was about something historic happened in my life. And as an extemper and later as an orator and as a congressperson, I had the opportunity on Saturday mornings to talk about it. And I didn't come from a family where we talked about our feelings. As I said, we didn't really talk about the news. And in my school, we weren't really talking about what happened because all of us, the students, the teachers alike, were pretty traumatized. So those Saturday mornings were the only place I felt like as a teenager I had a voice to talk about this tremendous thing I had experienced and why it mattered. So as soon as I went to college and decided I was going to come back and be a teacher in New York City, I started a debate team. And luckily, thank God, my students were not folks who survived terrorist attacks, but many of them, specifically as low-income people of color living in America, had experienced a substantial amount of trauma, like way too much trauma for teenagers to have gone through in their short lives. And I realized pretty quickly that speech and debate could be for them what it was for me, which is one of the only avenues they had to feel like their voice was heard and their voice mattered, and they could talk about what mattered to them and the problems that they were experiencing in their communities and in their families and in their lives.
Wow. I literally am enamored right now by by what is a beautiful story with so many that is DI, folks, right there. That is DI from Dico. All kinds of level changes and twists and turns, ebbs and flows. Thank you for sharing your experience and a lot of the lessons that you learned. I think are incredibly powerful, and I want to touch on that just a little bit. Um, I mentioned some themes that I took from our conversation yesterday, and I hear a lot of those in your story. Can you talk a little bit more about one, this activity and its ability to address and even combat the silencing of voices that are often furthest from power? And can you talk a little bit about why it is so critical that speech and debate be in as many high schools as possible and middle schools as well?
Yeah, I'll answer those in the reverse order.
Sure.
So it was obvious to me in 2001 that my friends and I needed speech and debate. We had experienced something bigger than we could process, and that we needed a place to talk about it. Our kids, the kids of this generation, are coming of age during an extraordinary time, an unprecedented, extraordinary time. And when I think for a second about like what the last 4 years have been like, the last 8 years have been like politically and socially, in terms of the pandemic, in terms of who's in the White House, in terms of insurrections, in terms, I mean, climate change, like school shootings, like pick a topic, and everything has just like exacerbated in the last couple of years, aka since our kids who are currently doing speech and debate have come of age. And I can't imagine. I genuinely cannot imagine what it feels like to be a teenager right now. I cannot imagine to be a kid that came of age during COVID, that came of age learning how to do hard lockdown drills in school, and that was normal. That came of age like watching the political dumpster fire that has taken place over the last 8 years in this country just like get worse and worse. So, and yet our kids don't have a choice. this is the world that they're growing up in, and they are so young that they don't have a political say in how to change things, but old enough that they see it. They know exactly what's happening, and it's scaring them and it's stressing them out and it's overwhelming them. And like, if we look at the mental health numbers in terms of like where adolescents are right now, it's terrifying. It is terrifying how many of our kids have experienced significant depression or suicidal thoughts like in the last couple of years. So when I think about like, why is there a need for speech and debate right now? Given my personal history and the way that I saw it transform my life and the lives of my siblings and the lives of my friends, particularly in light of catastrophic national events that hit close to home. Of course, we need it now more than ever, because our kids, all of them, and that's just at the baseline, not even talking about specific communities that are more marginalized, repressed than others systemically, but at the baseline, our kids are going through something that is profound. And the school system, like in the status quo, does not have, unfortunately, built-in channels for them to process it and for them to talk about it. In fact, in some states, it is illegal for them to talk about it or for their teachers to talk about it with them in their classrooms. So we know it's not happening in classrooms because in some states, it's literally illegal to talk about and learn about some of this stuff right now. So speech and debate is a channel and a place, a vehicle for them to have these conversations that they need to have. And I already forgot what the first question was. What was your first question?
Basically, the idea of speech and debate as a vehicle to combat
Oh,
silence.
yeah. So I'll take this from a like anecdotal perspective. The students that I've had that have had the most success in speech and debate followed a very similar trajectory. And it's similar to the one I followed too, which is they started with safe categories, safe topics, just like using someone else's words or using their words in a very conservative, political, social kind of way. And then over time, particularly as they looked around and noticed the power, the potential for power that they had in these spaces, they got braver. And my students had the kind of courage that I did not have as a teenager. And that included the courage to get up there and like write oratories about being the daughters of undocumented parents, being the daughter or like the kids of incarcerated parents, about what it feels like to be a Black disabled woman in this country, about calling out even some things in the speech and debate community. One of my orators, the first one to ever get to quarters at NSDAs, she wrote a beautiful oratory that was like, how come we have gotten used to Black students in forensics entertaining us in the interp events, but where are they in the analytical events? Well, why are we not also dominating extemp and Congress and debate? And just like the students started looking at the world around them and thinking about, wait a second, like just because I don't have political enfranchisement right now as a 16-year-old, just because like I don't have a say in my school or in my community, doesn't mean I can't have a say anywhere. And they thought about what are the things in their identity, in their lives, in their communities that are problems, that are things that they are carrying that they wanted other people to learn about. And speech and debate was the place where they got to talk about it. And I think like I often say as someone that's taught in New York City public schools for 13 years that it seems to me most schools are very good at getting kids to sit down and shut up. What speech and debate is good at is getting kids to stand up and speak up. And we need that now more than ever.
I love that you present that perspective broadly. And I particularly enjoy that because it allows us to focus on every single student, every identity, every ideology. And I want to talk, I want to listen to you talk a little bit about how you have seen the activity change in the 24, 25 years that you've been a part of it. But in particular, can you speak to the way that it feels like the kind of sociological pendulum has switched and has swung from one extreme to the other? Maybe talk about our need to bring it to the middle by calling people in, inviting people into conversation, but still having the critical conversations that are oftentimes difficult. Can you speak to your philosophy about what you've seen and how you view that need for us to bring everyone together to have a broader conversation?
Yeah. So you don't have to take my word for it, because the NSDA has archives from 20 years ago, from 30 years ago, of what final rounds look like. Go back and watch them. Particularly go watch the oratory rounds, because that's where folks had the most control, right?
Mm.
And then watch this year's. The difference is stark. And the difference, if I could put it in a word, is courage. The kids in the last decade or so, I would say, particularly since like the 2016 election, have found so much more courage than we had 20 years ago when we were doing this event. Because a lot of the topics that people used to pick were topics that were safe, topics that would just make people laugh, topics that were very completely universal, that everybody would understand, why we should not procrastinate, why we should not be nervous, like why, just very generic topics. And if it's a competition and you're trying to win the round, hey, that's a good strategy. Like, go with something generic. It's not going to alienate anyone. Fine. What I noticed in 2016, and Time Magazine did a piece on this called "The Racial Reckoning Comes to Speech and Debate," and they interviewed a bunch of my students and other students. But what I noticed, particularly in oratory, start to shift around that time was kids started picking less safe topics. And when this is called back on the ballot, there were a lot of ballots that they got that made it very clear that these topics were not safe, because a lot of judges were offended and a lot of judges got defensive, and a lot of folks, kids, did not do as well as they might have done with the safe topic, but they did it anyway. They did it anyway because they made a choice of, you know what, like, I am not doing this because I want to win. I'm doing this because I have a truth that needs to be heard. And I have something inside of me that I want to get out and share with the world. And I think in terms of what you're saying about like how we find a middle ground there is, I was telling you the story yesterday. I was talking with a really talented debater this year who's did very well at TOCs, and she's only like a junior, is phenomenal. And she was telling me that she was going to talk to her school board about whether her school should offer a certain course that was around, I want to say it was like around Black history. And in her particular school district, as in many districts across the country right now, this was a controversial topic. I don't like that it's a controversial topic. I think that should be offered everywhere, but not everyone agrees with me. And people in this school district didn't. And so she was going to the board to try to make this case. And she was telling me about it like a week before she went. And she was like, I'm a public forum debater. Like, I know how to do this. And and she was showing me her strategy. And I was like, yeah, so that would win the round if this were a round. That's not going to convince anyone at the board. Like, you need to rethink the approach here. Like, take the courage. Love that. Take the courage, take the fire, but also consider your audience and figure out where's the common ground that you can start with and build off of that. So I think that the oratories 20 years ago had something right in terms of like, find a generic topic, find the common ground, right? But I think the oratories these days also have something right, which is like, get your truth out there, say what you need to say. And what I say to my kids when they write oratories is like, look, when you start writing your message, don't start with the part where you are like, your speech should not start with you yelling at the world of like, what is true. You'll get there around minute 7. Okay, but you're going to start with something like that attention getting device, that hook, the introductory structure. It's designed to call people in. That's what it is. It's designed to build credibility with the people in the room and to build community and common ground, so that by the time you get to the part where you're pushing people outside their comfort zone, they already trust you. And they're more receptive, they're more likely to listen to you. And if the goal here is not just to win trophies, if the goal is really to change hearts and minds and to persuade people, whether it's in an oratory round and at a school board meeting or beyond forensics altogether, we have to get better at that part of the speech, right? Not just the part where we are yelling and shouting into the universe, like all the things that are unjust. Yeah, there are many. We could yell and there are, yes, and we should, and it is healthy to let that out. And there's a time and a place for that. But if your intention is really to change people's minds, the suggestion I give to all my students is you got to build a common ground first.
It's like being mean isn't always analogous to being meaningful.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit, Dico. I'd love to hear your coaching philosophy. You were a coach for quite a bit, Frederick Douglass Academy and Achievement First
Yeah.
Brooklyn High School. Talk a little bit about the lessons you learned as a coach and what advice you would have for an alum who wants to start a program in their community, either as a head coach or volunteer. So,
Yeah.
talk about your philosophy and maybe your nuggets of wisdom for someone who would want to start a team or be a coach.
So a lot of people have a false impression of the skills that I bring to the table. A lot of people read the
Mm.
Humans of New York story, or they read my former student Jonathan Conyers' memoir, I Wasn't Supposed to Be Here. And they say to me, God, like, you must be an incredible debater. And I'm like, fun fact, I am not. So the one time I actually tried debate in high school, as my coach will tell you, did not go well. And I was an okay speaker, sure, but I also wasn't the best. I was never the best, and I wasn't the best on my team. I was like, it was fine. But here's what I'm really good at building community. And
Mm.
I think the most important thing you can do as a coach has very little to do with teaching folks the structure of an argument or teaching kids how to flow or helping kids cut a piece and like get the blocking exactly right. The foundation's a lot more basic than that. It's like, why are you in this room?
Mm.
Why are you here? What brought you here? Like, why do you keep coming back? You are a teenager. You don't have to be here. You could be somewhere else. Like, why are you giving up your Saturdays? Why are you giving up your weeknights? Like, why are you here? And you start with the question of why, right? And then when you get an individual why, that's great, but it's even better when you have a collective why. And for me at the school where I attended at Sci, our collective why was really clear, which is we had gone through this thing together on September 11th. And our
Yeah.
collective why was like, this is how we respond to tragedy. Like this awful thing happened, and when you don't pay attention to the world around you, this awful thing's going to happen to other people too. So what do we learn from that? Well, we learn that, even if you're 17 years old, like, yeah, you better be reading The Economist. Like, you better be listening, like, you better be listening to the news. Like, you better be talking about this because this is your world. And the way that we keep each other safe is by knowing what's going on and staying involved. My collective why at my schools where I taught at Frederick Douglass and Achievement First was, I mean, unfortunately, it stemmed from the sad fact about the status quo, which is there are not nearly enough low-income public schools represented in this activity. And my students noticed it right away on the local circuit, and then even more dramatically on the state and national circuit. When they looked around, they said, holy smokes, like, where is everybody? Where's everybody that looks like us? Where's everybody that goes to schools like ours? Like, everybody here almost goes to a fancy private school where they charge a lot of money for tuition, or they go to a fancy public school in a school district where they charge a lot of money for houses. Like, there are very few low-income public schools represented at the local, state, national circuits. And so my message, the collective why to the kids was like, guys, do something about it. Like, this isn't acceptable. So like, go, let's change it. Like, let's do something about it. Go make history. Go be the first in your school to qualify for states or to get to finals at UPenn or to get to NSDAs. Like, every single step of the way, I could say to them, and it was earnest, they were making history for their school, for their community, and just like for the broader speech and debate family. And that, I think, is what propelled us forward. It's not because I was any sort of expert in speech or debate. I'm not. I am just someone that really believes in the power of this activity to change kids' lives. And I'm invested in building a safe space for kids where like they want to be in the room after school. That team becomes their family. We spend more time together than they spend with their actual families. And like, I got all their moms on speed dial. I'm still friends with moms of alumni that graduated 10 years ago. Like I send them happy Mother's Day cards on Mother's, like this is, you build a community. And then from there, everything else will come. But like, this is like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs things. Like you can't get to the self-actualization part until you got the survival and safety part down. And like, unfortunately, that's not something that all kids take for granted. Because a lot of them like don't feel safe in their schools or in their communities. And, it's helpful for them to have a place where they're like, I can count on this. And this is a group of people and an activity that like is going to be there for me. And, that's where we start. And to your second question about like, what would I say to folks that want to get involved? Please do, because there is a shortage of teachers right now. There's a shortage of coaches right now. And particularly if you are someone that comes from a community that has been disproportionately left out of speech and debate, we need you. And like, I'm speaking specifically to people of color, to people who are differently able, to people who are LGBTQ, to people that have been and continue to be systemically silenced. Our kids need to see you in the front of the room. They need to see you judging their rounds. They need to see you on the bus with them to tournaments. And if you're not sure where to start with coaching, like lucky for you, there are a lot of local leagues and national leagues, NSDA, that are filled with like one, like resources to help you out, and like two, people that this is a people business. This is what it is. Like, talk to us, like join the Facebook groups, like join the like follow Brooklyn Debate League on Instagram, like find us, talk to us. There's nothing we like talking about more than this activity. And we all got here because someone mentored us, and we're all happy to pay it forward to the next generation. And a good place to start, by the way, if you're not a teacher and you don't have a team, is like, if you live in your old neighborhood, go back to your school, because chances are you have no idea how hard your coach was working when you were a kid. Like kids like have no sense of this, like no sense of like the hours upon hours that go into running this team. I've had the privilege of working with my coach, Julie Scheinman, since graduation. And I look back and I'm like, good God, I don't know how this woman has been doing this since I've been alive. This is exhausting. This is crazy. It's radical. And like, I'm so glad that I'm able to help. But chances are your coach has also been doing something crazy and radical and exhausting, and you just didn't notice it because you were a kid. So go find them and see if they need judges, because you know that they do, right? And the other thing about judging and getting involved is that these days, for better or for worse, we have a lot of opportunities over Zoom that you don't even have to be there to help out and to judge and to get involved. Like I know NSDA hosts a springboard series, Brooklyn Debate League hosts a tournament every other week. Like there's a lot of online tournaments that are specifically put in place to provide more access to folks, where there's no registration fees or, sliding scale registration fees, and, finding ways to make it work so that all kids can come, even if they don't have a team, or even if they're not able to travel. Go find one of those in your community, or not in your community because it's online, and like volunteer, get to know coaches and see where you can be of help.
I'm going to ask one last question, and then we're going to go to our audience for questions. If there's time, we'll come back, because I want to talk about the BDL. I want to talk about Humans of New York. But we said this before we started. How are we going to fit all these things into such a limited amount of time? And so maybe we'll get a little time for more discussion, maybe not. But I do want to come to this last question before we give the audience a turn. I want you to take a moment, Dico, and let's just assume that there are principals, superintendents, department chairs, board of education members who are watching live or are watching a recording of this webinar. And their schools or their school systems, their school districts either don't have speech and debate, or once had it, don't have it anymore, or have no idea that speech and debate even exists. Take a moment to talk to them right now and tell them why this activity is so important and why they would benefit from taking the steps to have it in their schools.
People ask me sometimes, what does the world look like when all kids have access to speech and debate? And I don't have to imagine, because we have a pretty good case study. A couple of years ago, I'm sure you all remember the tragic school shooting in Parkland, in Florida. And I'm sure you all remember how those kids, children who had just experienced a traumatic school shooting, somehow found the courage to take to stages. They took to stages against the NRA. They took to stages against senators. They took to stages in front of thousands of people and led marches. And they somehow amplified their voices to get their message across, starting almost immediately. What people don't understand is that that is not a coincidence, because Broward County, Florida is one of the only counties in the United States where speech and debate is built into the curriculum for public school students. So the people that we think of as the heroes of the aftermath of that tragedy, like X Gonzalez, like David Hogg, they are folks who were students in a school district that prioritize speech and debate. I hate the fact that we live in a world where our kids are facing what those kids in Parkland faced. But they are. They are. That is the status quo. That is the world that we live in. So the very least that we can do is give them the same kind of tools that Broward County gave to its students, to have them stand up and talk about what is happening in their world and get their message across. And the fact that you recognize the names David Hogg and X Gonzalez, and that you remember what it was like when they took on Senator Marco Rubio, when they took on the NRA, when they stood in front of crowds, that should make you think about, what would it look like in your school? What would it look like in your city? If every single kid had access to this life-changing activity, if every single kid knew how to stand up and speak up. And you all as school leaders are trying to leave your mark. And of course you should be. That's the right approach. Let me tell you, there is no better way for you to leave a legacy than building a sustainable speech and debate program in your community. There's just not. I love advanced placement courses. I love chess teams. I love robotics. I love math teams. All of these things are important. Athletics, important, good, great. But speech and debate is the only activity of its kind that's going to teach kids how to use their voices to change the world. And you know, as educators, that we need the next generation to be able to talk across lines of differences and political ideologies better than we're currently doing. You know what is at stake here. You know, this is not just a nice to have, this is a need to have. Speech and debate is the way you get there.
Dico, it has been a privilege. Let's go to our audience and see if there's any questions.
On a speech and debate webinar. I know you all know how to talk. Don't be shy. Put something in the chat, guys.
I guess our conversation continues, Dico. But
I'm
if anyone has a question, by all means, pop it in the chat. We'll keep this conversation going a couple minutes longer, but we certainly want to defer to any questions that you may have. Dico, I've got an additional question. My first overtime question is to talk about the BDL.
Yeah. So in 2017, I took two sisters to the other nationals for the first time. We weren't quite good enough for NSCAs, but we made it to CFLs. And they got there, and I was walking one of them, a senior, to her oratory round, and there was a mom there with her daughter. And I asked what I thought was a very reasonable question, which was, oh, where's your daughter going to college? It's oratory, it's varsity, you know, senior event, sure. And she goes, oh no, she's a freshman. And I was like, excuse me, is she some sort of a prodigy? How did she get to nationals in oratory? And I found out that she was sending her child, as many well-to-do parents have been sending their children, to academies that are all around the country, where folks give middle school kids a head start in speech and debate at a cost of, you know, something to the tune of $5,000–10,000 a year. And I was pretty mad about it, because like there's already a gap. right? I can already count on one hand the number of low-income public schools that are competing on the state and national circuit. So there's already a gap, but then the gap is just widening because folks with means are just sending their kids, their middle schoolers, to these academies to get a head start. And I came back and I talked to my students about it, and I was like, well, what are we going to do? And my students and some local coaches, we all got together and we were like, well, we don't know how to change the whole system, but what can we do within our own locus of control? And we started the Brooklyn Debate League as a after school hobby, kind of like in addition to my full-time teaching and coaching job, where we invited local middle schools to come to our school once a month. And my kids were coaching them and then judging some tournament rounds for them. We had little ribbons and trophies for them. And it was just a way to promote access to speech and debate, because we weren't seeing it happening and we wanted to be the change. And then a couple of years after that, one of my former students, Jonathan Conyers, one of my OG former students, 2010, he had a conversation with Brandon Stanton, who runs the Humans of New York platform, which is a social media platform that has millions of followers. And he told the story about how being on my speech and debate team in Frederick Douglass when he was in high school completely changed the course of his life. That this was a kid who was living in homeless shelters. His parents were addicted to drugs. He had friends that had been arrested, and he had been and he joined debate, in his words, to keep himself off the streets, and change his life. He ended up getting a full ride to college at Stony Brook. He ended up being a respiratory therapist. He was on the front lines of the pandemic. He was the guy working ventilators, keeping people alive. He's now working the neonatal unit, keeping premature babies alive. So this man, who has now saved countless lives, said to Brandon and Humans of New York, debate saved his life. And it was a really compelling story also because it wasn't just what he got out of debate, but it also told from my perspective, what I got out of him and his teammates, which is at the time, I was just starting to experiment with gender. That was the first group of people I came out to. They were the first ones to meet my girlfriend at the time. They were the first ones I started wearing male clothing around. They're the ones I cut my hair around. It's when I started using different pronouns. People stopped calling me Miss Dico and just started calling me Dico. And those kids, that team, was my safe space to do that, because I didn't have a lot of other safe spaces to do it. And so it was this story about both of us and how we were there for each other during this critical time. And people really liked it because 48 hours later, they had donated $1.3 million to the Brooklyn Debate League. And at that point, John and I had the opportunity to take this little thing that we had started and to turn it into something much bigger. So since then, we have been partnering with New York City public schools to start teams at low-income public schools, subsidizing trips to states and nationals. We just finished our 2-week summer camp. We have online tournaments every other week. We are trying to really radically expand access to speech and debate to all students in New York City. And none of that would have happened if it wasn't for Jonathan's choice to use his voice and to tell his story and to give back to the community in this way.
I love it. Dico, one population community that is, I think, becoming more verbal, fortunately, in what they feel is they're kind of being left out, wanting to step into the conversation. That's our rural communities. And so a question that we have from one of our audience members is, how do you bring speech and debate to rural schools? And this person comes from a large city school, and the school's never even looked into the program. They want to start on it, but it's difficult, especially if they don't have teachers and coaches. Would you recommend something like shadowing? Can you offer a bit of perspective? We talk a lot about our urban schools, and definitely do not want to shortchange that. But can we also talk about maybe some best practices for our rural schools?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you're here and that you asked that question. So thank you for that. I will tell you, disclaimer, I am a New Yorker, born and bred, so I don't have personal lived experience living in or serving rural communities. But what I can tell you is, I think, like I was saying before, the opportunity to compete online has changed the game for a lot of people. So I'm thinking of a school that we have that joins our Brooklyn Debate League scrimmages every other week from Nebraska. And I've talked to the coach, and she's like, "Yeah, we don't have a lot of opportunities for our kids to compete, so this is great." And they come because of the time difference. They can do it like right after school, and they just all compete in our school. And not online tournaments are not the same as in person, and I'm not trying to say that they are. But if the choice is like no tournaments or online tournaments are a lot better. And there are a lot of opportunities right now. As I said before, the NSDA has a springboard series. If you go to brooklyndebateleague.org, you can email me and I'll send you this. You'll see the schedule and whatever. And there's a lot of other leagues too that are hosting online tournaments. And I don't know, I can't speak for everyone, but I can say for mine, it's really important for me to recognize whether you're an urban school or a rural school, that schools don't always have budgets, and kids don't always have the money to cover registration fees. So the Brooklyn Debate League is fully committed to meeting anyone where they are. And that means many of our kids just, compete for free, and that's totally fine. And I don't want teachers paying out of pocket. I was a teacher for too long, so I will not accept teachers paying out of pocket. And it is totally fine. But I would say like start there and see what online opportunities are there, just to give kids a chance to see this. And then the other piece that I think is really important is to like go contact other rural school districts. So like I know the Missoula Debate League, like the Urban Debate League in Montana, even though it's called the Urban Debate League, like I think they also, because they're Montana, like they face some of like the rural challenges. And like I would just look up a bunch of other folks that are doing this and call them and email them and like talk about how they got started and get some mentors, so you're not recreating the wheel.
I like that. I'd also say if you are interested in connecting with rural coaches, shameless plug for the NSDA Rural Coaches Network. This is a group that brings together coaches to talk about some of the unique barriers that they face, do some professional development, some networking and mentoring. If you'd like more information about that, feel free to email us at dei@speechanddebate.org. Happily get you connected with our co-chairs. We've got about 2.5 minutes left, Dico, so I'm gonna let you freestyle this. Any parting shots or last words?
Yeah. If you're on this call or a listener to this call, hopefully, probably it's because you or someone in your life did speech and debate. So I don't have to convince you how incredible this activity is, because hopefully you already know. But what I do want to convince you of is we are living at a moment in time where there's a movement happening. And the movement is like, we can change the face of speech and debate. This is a gatekeeper activity. Folks that go through this changes their lives. These are the folks that end up running for office. They end up sitting on the Supreme Court bench. They end up running the board meetings. They end up with a lot of influence in our society. And the fact that it has up until now almost exclusively been reserved for only certain people. People who are white, people who are wealthy, people who go to schools that are private or live in school districts that are rich school districts. It means that there's no pipeline to power for everybody else. And there's enough of us right now in the speech and debate world and outside the speech and debate world who aren't standing for this anymore and who want to do something about it. So my parting words to you would be, what do you want to do about it? And how do you get involved? And it could be as simple as like contacting local leagues and volunteering your time as a judge. Or it could be as extensive as like do a career change and come be a teacher. It is the best job in the world. And like being a debate coach is the best job for the best job in the world. So wherever you are on that spectrum, like recognize that we are living in a historic moment where we have the opportunity to do something radical together. And I hope that you will join us.
Dico, thank you so much for being here today, for taking some time to share your story. I know that we can't necessarily hear them because their mics aren't on, but I have a sinking suspicion that the people who are listening to this right now are applauding and applauding loudly. One of those people, by the way, is somebody by the name of Julie Scheinman.
That would be
You
my
might
debate.
know this
That's
person, whoever they
right.
are, they could not be prouder of you right now than they are in this moment. That they say that you are awesome, and I agree. Dico, a million thank yous. And to anybody who is listening to this webinar, who is thinking, I have a story. Will someone hear my story? We would love to engage your story. So if you've got a story to tell, please feel free to reach out to us at alumni@speechanddebate.org. That's all for today, folks. Thanks for joining us.